Hi everyone, Stjepan here. Today I'm going to show you the round 1 game from Zagreb Cup, from the Zagreb Cup, in which I faced a strong young Croatian international master, Sven Tica. He's very experienced, and the Zagreb Cup is a team competition, is a team cup played on 4 boards. I played board 1 for my team, and we didn't know the pairings for round 1, obviously. It worked similar to how open tournaments do. You basically get paired just before the round. There were, I'm going to say, 8 teams competing, maybe 7. And Novi Zagreb, who we faced, was the toughest team, the strongest team. My coach is actually board 2 for Novi Zagreb. Okay. So I have some vague idea of what Sven plays because I've been looking at some of his games when I was working on my repertoire. He plays complicated, interesting positions which suit strong players, and he has a way of not really getting you out of prep, but getting you out of your comfort zone. So what I want to talk about while we look at this game is why players like me, weaker players compared to the titled guys, choose to play uncomfortable positions or bad positions, because what I did in this game was all my own fault. Let me show you what happened. And I should also mention that how Sven played is, well, I want to be, I want to play like that one day. I want to win simply without any flashy moves or tactics. I just want to let my opponent beat himself with his dubious decisions. Okay, so he started d4. I played d5. We have the queen's gambit, c6, the Slav. Knight f3, knight f6, and here he chose the early queen to c2. Now, this move is tricky because it forces the black player to choose the nature of the position. Obviously, in Sven's case, he's comfortable with all types of positions because this is his main repertoire. He does sometimes start c4, but usually this is what he does. And here you can play several different ways. There are 2 natural ways to play this position. Usually this is going to either transpose into an open Catalan or into a closed Catalan with this queen on c2, because in most positions white is going to be playing with g3, and I knew that. So if you want to go for the open Catalan, then you take on c4, and if white wants to play the principled move, that's queen takes c4. Well, this is not the open Catalan, but it's going to become similar to that. Queen takes c4, recapturing the pawn straight away, and now developing the bishop. And this problem bishop on c8 has been developed, but in exchange you traded the center pawn for the c pawn. So after g3 and e6, I have a comfortable Caro-Kann position, which obviously I'm familiar with, and I think this would have been much better than what happened in the game. Alternatively, black could go for g6, which is these positions I'm not too comfortable with. Therefore, this wasn't even an option for me, even though I knew how this exact position should be played. So bishop f4, bishop g7, e3 castles, knight c3. Sometimes bishop f5 is coming, and then after queen b6, queen b3, we exchange queens. This is a relatively normal position. What I chose to play is, well, I'm going to say a mistake, even though it's the 3rd most common move. It's the position I'm most comfortable with, and it's the position I know best, and that's pawn to e6, going for a closed Catalan in the event of g3. Alternatively, playing the anti-Meran if white chooses to go e3. So here g3 is the most common move. After g3, knight bd7, bishop g2, bishop d6 castles, we have a mainline closed Catalan, which is actually what happened in the game. My opponent started with knight bd2, which is okay. Okay, knight bd7, g3, bishop e7, bishop d6 is also possible, but e4 is coming, so sometimes e5 can be scary. Bishop to g2 castles. And here we've reached a main line position, which has been played over 1,000 times. So what white wants to do in this position is prove that my bishop on c8 is bad. That's the strategic concept behind the closed Catalan from white's perspective. From black's perspective, you want to say that this bishop isn't that good either, and that you're going to be breaking the position at some point, either accepting an isolated pawn on d5 or pushing through with e5 and starting an attack later on. So b6 is the main idea here, similar to anti-Meran positions, but with the bishop on d6. And white continues e4. I'm sure Sven would have played it. I did not play b6 because I don't like these positions. Bishop to b7, e5, knight e8. And now it's, well, it's very hard to prove that this bishop is a good piece, in my opinion. Also, it's very hard to defend the king side, because I don't have a knight on f8 or on f6. h7 could sometimes be a problem square. That being said, I do have the c file. I do have the option to play f6, and maybe this was the correct way to play. It is the main line for a reason. I played rook e8, which is also a move, basically playing for e5 later on and leaving the bishop on c8 for the time being. Rook d1, bishop f8, again following through with my plan, and e4. Now this has to be taken because my knight does not have a retreat square on e8 because the rook's there. So d, knight e, queen e, all normal. And here I made a mistake. So what I want to do is reinforce e5. So I played queen c7, which isn't a huge blunder, but it's imprecise to say the least. A normal move in this position would have been knight f6, and once the queen moves away, then just go h6, and again try to play in a similar fashion to what I did, with queen c7, b6, bishop b7, eventually c5, and putting rook on d8. An engine move in this position, which I did not consider at all, is e5 straight away. That's the best move here. I should also say that this position has been played 3, 6, 8 times, and white managed to win all 8 games. So doesn't really score well for black. Again, coming back to my first point, why do I choose to play uncomfortable positions? I still cannot answer that really, but yeah, I did choose this. So e5 was the engine recommendation, and of course black should take this d5 and now queen to e7. And if the pawn is reinforced, then the engine wants to play knight c5. I mean, for a human it's very hard to give up a pawn like that. But on the bright side, my bishop is now alive. It could go to e6. I could even consider g6, bishop f5, bishop g7 to increase the pressure. So this makes sense once you see it, but if you don't see it during the game, yeah, it's very hard to give up a pawn like that. So queen c7, bishop f4 as expected, and bishop to d6. This was my idea. Bishop d6, queen d6, and here he played knight e5, which I expected. So obviously, if you put this bishop on g6, black is at least equal, I want to say, because my bishop is better than his. But for the time being, this bishop is still on c8, and I don't see a way to deal with that issue. So what I have to do is I have to fight for e5, and I played f6 straight away, which according to the engine is a mistake, but if I had this position again, I think I would have played it again, because I don't see any other way to improve my position. Obviously b6 is impossible here. The engine recommendation I don't understand at all. Okay, so the engine plays queen f8, and then for some reason plays queen e3 for white, and now it wants to play f6. Okay, and after knight d3, e5. And why would I play queen f8? I'm not sure. So I played f6 straight away. I didn't see a reason not to. This was my only chance to go for e5 and to liberate my bishop, so I did. Okay, now a slight issue is c5, which is perhaps why the engine wanted the queen on f8, but why should I move it before white plays c5? Why don't I move it now? That was my reasoning. So in this position, I have a way to win a pawn, but if I do that, I'm going to be suffering for the rest of the game, and I just thought that Sven was going to outplay me strategically because he'd have had vastly superior pieces. So tactically this works, but strategically after you win a pawn, you should be much worse. So knight c5, dc5, queen e5. If white doesn't trade queens, then I retreat back to c7, play e5 and bishop e6 and have a clear pawn and should be much better. So queen e5 and fe5. And now the problem is bishop e4, and I saw this and I just didn't want to go for it. I think king f7 should be the only move, with the idea of king e7 eventually and bishop d7, rook d8. I don't think I have a way to save the pawn, or at least I don't have the time to save the pawn. White's rooks are infiltrating on d6. This just seemed horrible. Again, this is the engine recommendation, which in this case I did see, but I just thought this is dreadful. Okay, so I went back to e7. f8 may have been more sensible. Okay, and here he played knight c4, of course. That's the problem with white having a pawn on c5. So now I have to react straight away, and I gave up a pawn because that was my original intention. I wanted to go for an endgame, a pawn down, because I thought that was my best chance to survive. I knew I was worse. I didn't know how much worse. I'm much worse. So e5. And rook e1 was played. If this is taken straight away, then knight c5 obviously is good for me. So he played rook e1. And now the idea of a pawn sack is pawn to f5. This, I think, has to be taken. So queen f5. And knight takes c5, attacking the queen. That's the whole point of f5. But he can just trade everything. So he did. He just went for a clean endgame. Queen takes, rook takes, rook takes, knight takes, knight d7. I have no other moves. Takes, takes, and d5 straight away. Now, this seems to be close to a draw. It's not a draw. This is a lost endgame. I played king f8. Maybe I should have played c5, but after d6, I think this is absolutely over, especially against someone of his caliber. If I go rook b8, for example, I mean, I have no chance of moving my pawn majority forward, and once the rook comes to e7, I can basically resign. So I played king f8. He took, I should have taken with the b pawn. This actually is a huge mistake, because when you're material down in an endgame, you want to trade pawns, not pieces. So taking with the b pawn was definitely more precise, and after b takes, for example, rook c1, rook b8, this surely would have been easier to hold than what I did in the game. But what I saw and what I'd intended to play, excuse me, I thought would give me a chance to trade pawns, and I couldn't see a way for him to prevent it. So I took with the bishop, pawn, rook e1 as expected. I should come back to this point where I played king f8. Maybe I should have played king f7. And if we go back to the position after rook e1, if my king was on f7, it would have been controlling the e6 square, which is very important. Okay, so here I cannot just play rook d8, which seems like the most normal move, and I saw that before I took with the bishop on c6. If I go rook d8, he can go rook e6 again. Had my king been on f7, different story, because now after rook d1, king g2, rook d2, he takes on c6, and once I take on b2, he can just check, pick up the pawn, defending the a pawn, and easily winning endgame. But my idea was a5 here, which actually is the best move. It's not enough to draw, but white could make a mistake and end up drawing. So a5, the idea is a4, and then rook to b8. So he plays b3, I played a4 anyway. Of course, if this is taken, it's a drawn endgame. because eventually we are going to have to trade the c pawn for the a pawn, and 3 against 2 on the king side. I'm sure he would have tried to win it. Maybe he'd have succeeded, but that should be drawn. So b4 here. And in this position, I played instantly, I played the move I'd intended to play originally, and that was a3. Rook d8 was interesting here, because now after rook e6, I can go rook to d2, and after a3, I can go rook to a2. And he probably has to go back to e3. Or alternatively, after a3, I could go here and again try to salvage the position this way. The engine says +2 because of rook e3, so this is basically a loss of tempo. But after rook a2, it says +1, so I may be able to hold this. Again, probably not because he's too strong, he would have found some resource. But in any case, I played a3. Seemed to be the most precise. Rook e6, here it doesn't work because I have rook d8. He has to go back. If he takes on c6, then I go rook d2, and this again should be a draw because here, and let's say king g2, I go here, and we agree to a draw. Again, he would have played on and maybe would have beaten me, but this, I think I would have been able to hold this. So after rook e3, he went back with rook e3. I played rook a8. Rook a8 is a mistake. I should have played rook b8, which is a more active move. And after rook b3, I should have played rook b5. Again, if he takes, I take. And now the question is, whose king is faster? But I played rook a8. This is imprecise because it basically gives him a whole tempo with king f1. Rook b8 now. Again, I gave him a clean tempo. Why is his king on f1 instead of on g1? So rook e4, rook b5, rook c4, rook b6, and this is the final blunder. After rook b6, there's no chance for him to end up in a drawn endgame. This is just too passive. Again, I don't have to worry about this. He cannot take. If I go king e7, for example, then takes. Wait, actually, what was my reasoning here? Yeah, this is why I didn't play it. Yeah, okay, it loses anyway. Yeah, what am I talking about? King e7 loses, rook b6 loses too. I didn't play rook king e7 because he gets to go to a6. But yeah, it's lost in any case now. King e2, king e7, king d3, king d6, king c3, rook b7. I cannot play rook a6 straight away because of b5. And yeah, this was a very simple conversion, creating weaknesses on the other side of the board. And here I'm basically in Zugzwang. I cannot move my rook, cannot move my king, so I have to play g5. He played f4. I took, he took, and I resigned. I don't really know what to say about this game. I felt kind of annoyed because I lost without a fight. But more so, I felt bad because I was the one who chose to go for a closed Catalan, not him. And even though that's the type of position I know best, it was still a very bad choice. So yeah, I mean, this is a great example of how strong players beat weak players, and congratulations to my opponent. Yeah, see you tomorrow. With the next game from the Zagreb Cup. I hope you learned something from this. I mean, this is usually how I lose to strong players. They just do nothing and I beat myself. And again, I would like to be on the other side of that someday. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.